For the next session, I will invite two people on stage. The first is our product owner of the energy transition team. He has spent many years at one of the largest industrial gas companies buying energy. It's probably one of the Europeans having been involved in most PPAs. Did a small detour to some American supplier advisor to then finally come into the warm family of E&C. Ander, please join us on stage. And Ander will be joined by an award-winning podcast host, Gerard Reed. Please, Gerard, join us on stage. Gerard is the founder of Alexa Capital, with a deep expertise on energy markets and mobility, which is becoming ever more part of the energy markets. So I'll hand over the pointer. Okay, please go.
All right. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for the introductions, Jens. It's really great to see such a large audience here, a lot of familiar faces, coming out to think about a really important topic of energy transition. And we're going to kick off this session with Gerard, who's going to talk about the relevance of the energy transition, why it matters to energy buyers. After that, I will provide a brief overview of power purchase agreements, PPAs, and their risks. And then we'll ask all of you to become a little bit more active in answering some poll questions that we have prepared, which will guide a conversation between Gerard and me, both from an investor, developer's perspective and from a buyer's perspective. Gerard?
Very good. Thank you very much. It's good to be here. I come from a different world. I come from the finance world, right? And I would describe myself as an accidental expert in the energy space. And I'll tell you what happened, right? And it's important because it just sets the context of what I'm going to talk about. I had an investor client of mine 20 years ago asked me to look at do some due diligence in an investment he wanted to do, and he wanted to invest in a solar company. And I went and looked at all the numbers of this solar company, and I said, this is an absolute joke, don't go near this. And he said to me, no, Gerard, please go and visit the factory. So I visited the factory in Berlin, and I was more convinced than ever that it was a complete joke. And I went back to him and said, just don't even go near this business. I said, it's all been done by hand. I said, if I look at the cost of this is crazy. You know, it's basically, at that point in time, just to give you an idea, you were probably at about 600 euros a megawatt hour to produce electricity with a solar panel. He introduced me anyway. He said, you need to meet the founder. I met the founder. And the founder somehow convinced me that this was like a semiconductor product, and that you had a Moore's law and the costs were going to go down like this. Okay, 20 years later, and the costs are at 30 euros. And thankfully, I did tell my client to invest in the business, and that changed my career. That went in a completely different direction to what I'd expected to. And here I am standing up here today, okay? So let me just talk a little bit about, oh yeah, use it. Well, can you use this? It's fine, it's fine. Let me just talk a little bit about the energy big picture and what's going on, right? The first thing that I want to say to all of us is electricity is the king of energy. If tomorrow there's no coal, no gas, I can survive. If electricity goes down in this city today, we'll survive how long? 2 days, 3 days? Maximum, okay? Just read it. That's how dependent we are on electricity for everything, right? Just imagine you won't be able to go to a shop and pay for anything because all the digital systems that are behind it are down, right? So that's just first and foremost. Be really clear in our head that it is the most important thing, is electricity. And the word that I would use most important than anything else is resilience. That's the most important thing that everyone in this room needs. Okay? You just look at the Ukraine and realize that half of their power stations are out. Why do you think the Russians take out transformers? Okay? That's how you destroy the soul of a nation, is by taking out the electricity system. Right? So that's the negative stuff. But if I really be positive, if you want to decarbonize society, what you need to do is electrify as much as you can of it. Now, I'm not of the belief, and I'm not going to say to you that we need to get to net zero, because what we end up doing is we end up fighting about this last 5% of decarbonisation. That's not important. What is important is that we electrify as much as we can of our systems, and it starts with all you in the room, because there's not one of you in the room that cannot electrify all of the processes that you have in place. Okay, so be clear on this. This is what the scientists are saying as well, by the way. We have to do this, right? Now, let me just give you this statement. Irrelevance happens when the speed of change outside an organization is greater than the speed of change inside an organization. Now, I'm going to make a point as a European that irrelevance happens when the speed of change outside an organization, outside a country, is greater than the speed of change inside Europe. And why am I saying this? Because we don't realize the speed of change in the world. And the speed of change is taking place in China. It's not taking place in Europe. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is, and also to understand that the speed of change, that the experts in all the different areas have no idea of the speed of change. And let me just start with the IEA. So the IEA is obviously meant to be the leading institute and research institute worldwide on energy. And this was their numbers from 2019 on renewables. And if you can see them up here on the right there, what they were looking at was, if you can see here, accelerated pace by 2024, annual installations would be about 280 gigawatts. So I'll just give you an idea this year that solar installations this year are probably going to be 500 gigawatts, just solar. Okay, now that's only a few years ago. How can you get that so wrong? How can you get 3-year predictions so wrong? The reason is the speed of technology improvement. All right? It's really, really difficult for the analysts. And I know the analysts in the IEA, and they've been getting it wrong year after year after year. And the reason for it is that. It's just the cost reductions. And I talked about solar. You can see it's not just onshore wind, offshore wind, solar. These are the cost reductions over the last 10 years. But just look on the right here. This is the cost reductions in the last 12 months. So solar panel prices are down 30% in 12 months. Right? That means that you might have been doing modeling for putting solar on your rooftop a year ago, and the costs are 30% lower. And by the way, I haven't talked about the power electronics and the other costs in and around this, which are also quite revolutionary, right? So that's that. The next thing I would talk about is batteries. Avison is a French institute, consultancy business, regarded as the top consultancy firm in the world in batteries. If I went back, and I looked at their predictions in 2015, and basically they basically didn't see the electrification of the automobile in any of their predictions. So what they saw was that the market for batteries by 2025 would be 60,000 megawatt hours. We're at 1,000 megawatt hours, right? Just be really clear, we're at 1,000. That's where we're at. No, sorry, gigawatt hours. We're at 1,000 gigawatt hours in terms of battery there. Okay, the leading expert, completely wrong, because they didn't, and I'm not going to criticize them. Again, it's really the speed of innovation here. It's what happened in terms of the different technologies, right? 10 years ago, if you said to me, we're going to electrify transport, and I'm going to electrify planes, I would have thought you're mad. I don't believe that anymore. I actually do believe there's a possibility that we will electrify planes, because the speed of innovation and improvement in technologies on the battery front is mind-boggling, right? And also the cost reduction is incredible. I'm going to give you batteries again. Batteries, since the beginning of this year, down, are 35% down. Just 6 months, right? So that's batteries. Then we go to EVs. Goldman Sachs, 2017, they predicted by 2040 we'd be at sort of, that's where you can actually look at the numbers here. They were looking at 2021, that basically what you'd have is 1% market share worldwide for EVs. And you can see the numbers up there today. You're at 14 million is what you were at last year. 14 million is 20% of automobiles across the world. By the way, China's at 50% in the first quarter. Just be clear, 50% of all new cars in China in the first quarter are electric. So again, experts getting it wrong. Why did they get it wrong? Well, they didn't understand the innovation of two companies, Tesla and BYD. right? I think we all know Tesla, but BYD, Build Your Dreams, is the Chinese version of it. And if I'm really going to put my money in anyone who revolutionizes the world going forward, it's BYD, because they're bringing cheap cars to the market, okay? Now, of course, in Europe here, we don't like cheap cars, so what we're going to do is put import tax on them coming in from China. That's what we're going to do, all right? Because we want to keep the internal combustion engine because it's good for our environment, it's good for our jobs, right? So the next point I would say is, even the experts don't realize a change. This is the Dutch grid. The Dutch grid is here on 2021. The red and yellow are just showing where there's no capacity available. And what you see is 2 years later, there's no capacity available in the Netherlands. So just let me put that into perspective. You build a new school, you can't get a grid connection in the Netherlands. Now, how did that happen in 2 years? Well, the reason it happened was because of the massive penetration of solar and EVs that have taken the grid operators by complete shock. Okay, they weren't prepared for it in any way. The result is the Netherlands now has to bring in emergency measures. And now let me tell you what they'll do. They'll bring in mobile batteries. So in summer, lots of sun, they'll make sure the batteries are where the bottlenecks are. And then there's bottlenecks in winter because there's too much offshore wind, we put them there. This is what they have to do. And they can't get the grid built quick enough in these areas. And by the way, this is coming everywhere. It's not just there. This is in parts of Germany as well as we speak now. I live outside Berlin. North of Berlin is a city called Oranienburg. Exact same thing. Now, why do I say all this? I say this is because don't use the word transition. It's not a transition. This is a revolution we're going through. Okay? And the revolution is incredibly important for us all to understand, because if you don't understand it, I'm just going to tell you now, your Chinese competitors are going to kill you. Because they understand that. Okay? That's why they lead in this revolution. They know that it's about renewable energy, electrification, and efficiency. They're the three key factors going forward, right? So let me look at this future, because I want to just give you a view of my opinion of how the future is, right? The first thing is we will deeply electrify our energy system. That's the first point, all right? And the faster we do it, the better it is for our businesses and our societies, okay? Not an easy road to do this, but the first thing we do is definitely we're going to electrify. Why do we say that? Well, I say that is because if you look at the key tools, heat pumps, EV cars, EV trucks, digitally enabled automated devices, everything's going to be connected together. It already sort of is already, but there's no business models in it yet, but it's coming, right? The next thing is the electricity demand is going to grow. So those of you know that if you look in North America, Europe, electricity demand is lower than 20 years ago. Now, so you understand why that is. People go, how can that be? Oh, yeah. We're just not growing. That's not true. It's called energy efficiency. There's one device that is the cause of electricity demand going up. Does anybody know what it is? What device has caused electricity demand not to grow in 20 years? It's called an LED. It's called an LED, all right? We used to have 9% of electricity demand going to lighting. Now it's like 2%, okay? So despite all this growth in all our devices and this, that, and the other thing, electricity demand down. Now, that's not going to happen going forward because we electrify heat and we electrify transport, right? And obviously, we've also got artificial intelligence on top of that as well. Now, what does this mean? This also means that the system is going through massive change. It used to be big centralized generation, big industry, and your big electricity pylons going into cities and into industrial landscapes. It's not anymore. It's going to a distributed world, very similar to the internet that we have today, which is, you can't really take the internet down. You might take down part of it, but that's where we're going to. It's a resilient system which is decentralized. It's not someone sitting in a control room pulling a lever. It's decentralized, right? So that's first and foremost. The next point I would say is the future system, energy system, I say energy system, is built around renewable energy. And the reason is low cost. It's the lowest cost way to produce electricity, wherever it is in the world. The alternatives, such as nuclear, are just too expensive and take too long. I'm a finance guy. Sorry, I'm not going to finance any nuclear power station. The reason is because nobody can build them on time or in budget. And I don't care if that's in China, Japan, Europe, North America, nowhere. Okay? So until you can sort out building on time and on budget, people aren't going to build them. All right? Unless they're massive subsidies from governments, right? I also want to say renewables lowest cost. This is just some of the numbers here on it. This is from Bloomberg New Energy Finds. I will also say the technology innovation in the space is absolutely unbelievable. Okay, and I'll show you a little bit of this in a second. Solar in particular, I believe, will power the future power system. And I hear people say, but what happens on a dark night? And I go, well, what happens on a dark night with all our plants? They go to sleep, right? The energy, they still produce energy and grow every day, the same as we do. We eat 3 times a day. Well, so what? I don't need energy in the other periods of time. It's a mindset change that's needed in the solar space. The system will be built around solar because it's the lowest cost. I do want to make a point. This is Bloomberg. Last year, they had predictions at the beginning of the year. This was March last year. They said the prediction was going to be that there would be 320 gigawatts installed worldwide. It ended up being 413. So the leading expert in this, still not getting the predictions right. And again, it says something about the technology. And what it is about the technology is this. Last year, there was more money put in solar installations than there was in the oil and gas industry. Just to realize that statistic. That tells you something where the capital is flowing. And my own view is that's going to go and improve even more. And I'll explain why. Today, if you put solar on the roof in California, it'll cost you about $2.75 a watt. Right? Someone puts it in there, you have to put inverters in, et cetera, et cetera. This is a balcony solar system which you can buy in Europe. The grid operators have no clue what's going to happen with this. But what this is there's a microinverter in it, and that means basically I can install it myself. I can plug it into any plug. Just realize what I'm just saying, any plug. There's no electrician needed, no installation. I'm at 60 cents a watt. Now, what this means, and I'll give you the payback, if I'm sitting in Germany or the UK today, if I put this on my balcony, I've got a 1.5-year payback on that investment. And guess what? The grid operator has no clue what's going on. All he sees is, oh, he's buying less electricity than it was before. Now, why am I saying this? That's a power electronics solution. That's coming into larger scale systems in solar going forward. Add batteries in there and you see where I'm coming from. Okay, suddenly you cannot stop this technology. All right, you can't. It's as simple as that because we've never had an energy technology that's so easy to install and so quick to install. Next point I'll make is that EVs will come faster than you think. These are some of the predictions out there in terms of predictions. What you've got is Rystad, who's a Norwegian consultancy business. They're saying 55%. OPEC is down at 10% still. Now remember, China's at 50% in the first quarter. So who are you going to go with? My own view would be at 75%. And the reason is the scale of innovation and the speed of progress. And I'm going to give an example in the Chinese. We are now in Europe now going to put import tax on the Chinese. But the Chinese now have 20,000 euro automobiles. Right? Just right here what I said, 20,000 euro automobiles. We don't in Europe yet. But the reason is because they have the scale and the cost structure that we don't have, right? But the point is, the writing is on the wall where we're going with this. And I said to someone last night, I said, if I have an electric vehicle, I'm not going back to an internal combustion engine. I've been driving them for 10 years. No way am I going to them. And I think that's the same with anyone. And once you get the range of these cars up, then it becomes very interesting. And what I would say to you is, if you look at it, what you've got is price parity already at the upper end of the market. So if you want to buy an SUV today, the internal combustion engine price is the exact same thing as an EV. And what you're going to see is that's going to go lower and lower through the market, okay? So this is this. But I also want to make a point as well. It is not just the car that is electrifying. If you actually look, and this is the most interesting one, 44% of two-wheelers across the world, scooters and bikes, are electrified. Those of you who go to Asia, you'll see that the Asians, none of them buy internal combustion engined motorbikes. What they do is they buy 90% basically of these are actually electrified. We in Europe are still buying internal combustion engine bikes. It's absolutely crazy. They're not. And that's why the Chinese have an advantage, because they've been doing this for 10 years. So they have all the components, they have all the motors, they have all the know-how, they have all the infrastructure in place. And I look, and you can see what I'm saying there, 43% of buses worldwide, right? So this, again, you can't stop. Next thing is we will see a boom in energy storage. Energy storage, we all take for granted. And I always say, how do you store the energy for, a winter's day? Well, how do we do it at present? We put coal in a coal bunker, we put gas in a gas tank, we put oil in an oil tank. It's normal to store electricity. So it's not a hindrance to say, hey, you know, electricity, we can't meet the Dunkelflaute of these 2 or 3 days of the year where there's no wind and no solar. We just store the electricity or take it from gas or whatever. But I do want to say, from an electricity point of view, we have never seen a technology like lithium-ion. It has revolutionized our world, right? Be really clear, all the devices that we have in our pockets, if you had a lead-acid battery, none of us would be actually using the devices that we have today. This technology has revolutionized our world and will continue to. What I will say as well is this gives you an idea of what happens in the future. This is California. The Californians talk about a so-called duck curve. You might not think that looks like a duck, but they think it looks like a duck. The yellow there is a solar. So what happens is, the duck curve is, well, what happens when the sun goes in and the sun's not there? See that green area there and that green area there? They're batteries. So what's actually happening is, and you can see on this particular day, there was, in the evening, more power generated with batteries than there was with any other source of electricity. And it just gives you a view of where it's going. And the exact same thing before the sun goes up in the morning. So you could actually take this a little bit beyond that and say, well, actually, we might do this 24/7. We'll take solar, and we'll actually use batteries or some form of storage device for the rest, right? Again, I want to talk about revolutionizing our homes, batteries. This is the numbers in Germany and Italy. Germany's nearly 80% of solar installations last year had batteries attached. Why? I'll tell you why. Because I pay 30 euro cents for my electricity, and I'm generating electricity on my roof at 10. Well, why would I give it to the grid at 5 and then buy it back at 30? This is just stupidity. So I put in a battery to make sure that I'm optimizing my self-generation. Now that's going to happen more and more and more because, again, it gets cheaper. It's not in the industrial area yet. It doesn't make economic sense yet, but it's coming. It's coming. I just want to say it is definitely coming. And again, I would also say it's because of the speed of technology change. I drive this car up in the top right-hand corner. It's a BMW iX3. I'm now not going to be driving that going forward because BMW hasn't innovated. This is a Chinese car at present. It's very similar price to it. It's not in the market here at present. But this car has twice the range. It's a 1,000-kilometer range. Right? Again, technology innovation on it. I also want to make a point is that we will reduce energy consumption. We will do this automatically by electrifying. Electrification is cheaper. Okay, we'll also do it by actually putting sensors and digital technologies in to make it easier for us so that we need to think about it. I don't want to think about switching on my heating system, switching off my lights, etc., etc. But if this is done automatically for me and is put in a service agreement, it suddenly becomes very interesting. My own view, energy efficiency absolutely booms. And again, your area is very important because what do? You've got a whole pile of waste heat and you just throw it up into the sky, right? You have to think about how do you use this and why you don't use it. One thing that's very interesting is economics will push energy efficiency. This here is the price discount for different grades of buildings in Germany. And what you see is in 2021, there was a 10% difference between a grade A and a grade E building, grade A being bad. Now we're down at 20%. So this means as a property owner, I go, oh shit, I've got a real problem in my property portfolio going forward. So what you're going to see is a massive array of innovation in this area to actually go and change things and improve building efficiency. What I will also say is that many incumbents, even global leaders, will not survive, right? It's the Nokia moment. I look at Volkswagen. I don't know if they're going to be around in 10 years' time. They're the number 2 automobile manufacturer worldwide, but I just want to give you an idea of their cost structure. This is the Volkswagen ID4 versus the BYD CLU. You can look at the price in China. So you can buy the ID4 for 31,000, or you can buy the BYD for 21,000. They both got the same range, and actually, to be honest, the software is better than the BYD. I go and look in Germany, and you can see how much money BYD are making in it because their costs are so low, 41,000, and the ID4 is 46,000. They're gone. So they can keep producing their internal combustion engines for as long as they want, but they've been out-innovated, right? And what this means, though, is this is what's going to happen. There's going to be huge resistance from them. And not just them. It's incumbents in general, an oil company. They're going to block it. Even some utilities are going to block it, right? Now, what I would say to you is there will be massive positive surprises going forward. Remember this chart. This is innovation, right? I will definitely make a prediction, and that would be this. I said to you 10 years ago, it was unthinkable that we would electrify trucks or planes. Everyone was talking about fuel cells, hydrogen. Nobody's talking about them anymore in the industry, except BMW. Except BMW. But we'll ignore BMW. But the point about it is, the innovation is taking place in this space. And what happens is, as batteries get better, then what actually happens is you open up more markets to them, all right? Now, last point I would say is this. This is what's going on. And the question is, so what for you guys, right? Well, we've entered the era of high energy volatility. And that's an opportunity and a threat. So let me just talk about the threat. The threat is this here. On the left here, this was Monday last week. On the Sunday in Germany, power prices across the continent were minus. So in other words, if you wanted to have electricity, somebody would pay you to have it. That's the opportunity. Somebody would pay you to use electricity. You can have electricity for free. And by the way, I would just say to you, since April across continental Europe, 3/4 of the Sundays, 3/4 of them, have zero prices across the whole continent. So that tells you something. You need to be changing your production processes to meet what's going on in this, right? And that is the opportunity. But the threat is you get it wrong. So what happened here was in Germany, power prices hit 10,000 euros a megawatt hour. 10,000. And the reason it happened was there were storms in the south of the country. We all thought all the solar was going to come online, and it didn't come online because there was so much cloud cover, and prices went to 10,000 euros a megawatt hour. That's the threat. Now, by the way, I'm going to say there is an opportunity, and the opportunity is if you had a battery there, you'd make so much money. So battery installation costs are about 300,000 a megawatt hour. So you can imagine, in those 3-hour period in that day, I made 30,000. You see where I'm coming from? So I will just say to you, in certain areas, batteries, and I've seen it, because I do a lot of work in the area, there are batteries in the UK market, in the German market, where payback periods on the batteries are 1 year. All right? So that, again, that's an opportunity. And by the way, as industrial buyers, I believe you have to really think about this and integrate all this in. And if you do, then you have a really, really exciting opportunity and possibility to compete. I'll stop there, Andrew, sorry.
Thank you very much, Gerard, for enlightening us. And I'll stick to energy transition, but know that in reality it's a revolution. So, power purchase agreements, or PPAs. What is a PPA? Well, according to Wikipedia, it's a long-term contract between an electricity generator and a customer, company, to offtake power for anything between 5 up to 20 years, potentially even more, at a pre-negotiated price. It involves renewable energy, not necessarily clear from the naming, but anyway. And it's for a predefined amount of energy or a predefined share from the generating unit. A PPA is really a unique product in my view, as it can create a win-win situation for developers and for buyers. For developers, it's a route to market with secured revenue for project financing. For buyers, it can provide both financial and environmental benefits. PPAs can give buyers direct access to decreasing costs of renewables. Solar and wind, as Gerard already mentioned, are now the cheapest sources of electricity. So in a sense, it's business-wise to switch to renewables. They can also be an opportunity to get long-term electricity price hedges for cost certainty for energy buyers, and cost certainty for terms which are not necessarily available from the traded markets. And last but not least, they can avoid reputation risk for buyers by purchasing certificates, guarantees of origin in Europe or RECs in the US, purchasing those certificates from new assets, so assets that are still under development or under construction, rather from existing assets. And this is creating so-called additionality. AI, what does AI say about additionality and the importance of additionality? It can help progress towards net zero, it can show sustainability leadership, and it can help support grid transformation. Accusations of greenwashing can really damage reputation and credibility for corporates. And so it's really important when marketing your renewable energy procurement that you make your claims very clear and specific. And this is even going to be defined in the EU in the upcoming Green Transformation Unfair Practices Directive. So we're going to see more of that going forward. What does a PPA look like? Well, there are in essence two types to structure your PPA. It can be a PPA that physically delivers the power to you directly from the producer to the consumer, and similarly for the certificates. Or it can be a financial or virtual PPA where the power is settled into the spot market with a contract for difference, and the certificates are still supplied physically to you as the buyer. Are there any risks associated with PPAs? Yes, there are, and probably more than with ordinary supply contracts. We like to distinguish three categories of risk: commercial risks, project execution risks, and contractual risks. There is price risk, which comes from the uncertainty about the development of the wholesale market prices for the term of the PPA. There's also an element here of timing of when to close the PPAs. There is basis risk for cross-border PPAs coming from the uncertainty about the development of the high or low correlation between different markets, different countries. In essence, it's a measure of the hedge effectiveness if you're buying your renewables in a different country from your consumption. There is the duck curve that Gerard mentioned. It's the shape or profile risk, which is coming from the uncertainty about the development of the total intermittent generation within a market and the impact that has on the value that an asset is able to capture from the market, creating this duck curve. And it's particularly the high concentration of solar that is causing basically all the other generation types out of the merit order. In Germany, we've seen massive solar growth last year, up to 20%. That will mean that this year the solar peak is expected to be 50 gigawatts. So during let's say, a sunny summer day around noon, 50 gigawatts of solar production alone, which happens to be more or less equal to the total demand around that time in Germany. So you can imagine the impact this will have on the pricing in the market. It will lead to more frequent low or even negative prices. Then there's also volume risk that needs to be considered, basically coming from the uncertainty about the development of the individual production profile and the amounts which are generated and the consumption profile. And this is particularly important when you start to cover a larger share of your consumption with PPAs. And so it's really important to realize that the fixed price from a PPA only counts for the volume that's produced and consumed. Any volume that's produced and not consumed is actually increasing your market exposure as it will need to be sold into the market. Then we have project risk, as we're dealing typically with new assets which are still under development, under construction. And that means that we have development risk and developer risk coming from the uncertainty about the completion of the project. And so it's really important as part of the due diligence process during PPA sourcing that you consider project maturity and developer experience. And then we have contractual risk coming from ambiguity in relation to contract terms, non-compliance to contractual obligations, or external factors which are beyond the control of both parties for the duration of the contract and impacting the contract. This is obviously not unlike any other supply contract, but because of the long term, it typically requires more scrutiny than otherwise. It also clarifies why the most common PPA template in Europe, the EFAT template, is more than 60 pages long, and that's just the template. So what we have done, we have a couple of questions which we would like you to answer by scanning the QR code. We're going to make it as big as possible for you. And I can't see the question now, but I believe the question is, have you closed any PPAs? 3 possible answers. Yes, no, but we're reviewing, thinking about it, potentially negotiating it, or a plain no. There's one answer. It gives us 100%. Shall we go for the backup plan?
Yeah.
Yeah? Just a traditional show of hands. I know it's not confidential, but
it's much easier.
hopefully the questions are, not too sensitive. So, in relation to the first answer, which of you have closed a PPA? At least one.
Yeah. Most people.
What would you say about a third?
Yeah.
Yeah. How about no, but we're seriously reviewing or potentially already negotiating? That's less.
Okay.
And so I guess by default that means all the others still a no. And that's probably what I would expect. There's still quite a lot of potential demand out there for PPAs. We have seen from Gerard's presentation, of course, that there's a lot of growth in renewables expected. The numbers are staggering. That's true for renewables, but the same is true for corporate PPAs. So according to the PPA tracker from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, in 2015, 4.7 gigawatts of corporate PPAs were announced. Last year, that was 46 gigawatts. So that's almost 10 times the market in only 8 years, and there's still a lot of potential demand out there. I think what's also really encouraging is not just the size of the corporate PPA market, but also the geographic spread. So last year, 46 gigawatts. I mentioned a third of that in the US, a third of that in Europe, and a third in the rest of the world. So just to show it's not just, let's say, the usual suspects in relation to the markets where corporate PPAs are announced. I think what's also clear is that we're seeing a lot of political and regulatory support for PPAs under the Renewable Energy Directive, the electricity market design, helping more renewables come on stream by helping their permitting, their grid interconnections, building out grid networks that will make more projects available, but also very specific support for PPAs, credit guarantee schemes for those companies which struggle with their credit ratings. We're also seeing a movement now in allowing projects to combine government subsidies, contracts for differences, with PPAs. So they can, let's say, sell part of their output under the subsidy scheme and sell the other part, take potentially a little bit more risk under a PPA. So those are all, I think, very positive developments. And so the risks are clear. I mean, that will require robust financial analysis and modeling. I was expecting actually a little bit more in relation to transaction complexity, because it's something that should not be underestimated. It's a process from start to finish. as most of you who have done a PPA will tell, of at least 9 months. And if it's going to be your first, you should really count on more than that. So it's a very long process. And it's also a process that you're required to really follow step by step. You have to trust the process of going through proper education, strategy setting before tendering in the market, doing robust analysis, and then spending a lot of time with a lot of advisors, legal advisors, financial advisors, tax advisors, potentially in contracting and doing the final negotiations. Very lengthy processes, but worthwhile doing, hopefully for the reasons that we've just shown. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good.